Okie dokie. Let's get into why I stopped queuing for support. A biography written by Chewy about me. So, why I stopped queuing about support is a video in which I detail why I think the support role has issues, specifically with a lot of the nerfs that were unintended for the support role and nerfs that were probably directly intended for the support role. So let's get into this. And Chewy's going to jump over here at some point. So in 8.15 was truly one of the patches that made me really not want to play support. And this happened because they made it so that you have less sustain in lane. They nerfed it. They nerfed the support itemization cost, so you can't start refillable, which was one of the most efficient starts in the game if you could pull it off on a sustained supports like, say, Nami or even Morgana to some extent. You could start refillable and buy a Dark Seal later and just have that Dark Seal combination be really, really effective. You can't do that anymore. You can only have 2 health potions. It limits your healing by 33%, or it reduces it by 33%. You have less available starts. You can't do the pink ward plus health potion start like you used to with the support item. And just overall, this just had an immense effect on the support role. When you reduce the sustain that lane supports have because they have less health potions, and you also limit what they can do, there's less strategy because you can't, in some champions could start the pink ward plus health potion. You can't even take a gamble and be like, all right, I'm going to do refillable, even though I do 3 health potions, so I'll have less sustain. But if we pull it off, if we make it out of laning phase early on without being behind, I just made 150 gold. I didn't waste that 150 gold on health potions. So this was a huge impact. Like them nerfing the support itemization cost made it less effective to lane with supports, which supports, that's where you carried, was your laning phase. When you can't have as much impact through that, it really hurts the support role. All right, and Stormrazor may have gotten nerfed this patch, but it's still basically the best first item to rush. So when there's a big power difference in the bottom lane, like say one bot lane gets a lead, when one ADC gets Stormrazor versus one that doesn't, the support champion is just less effective. This means you could be playing the Lulu supports or even a tank supports. Like if you go in and you don't have as much damage as them, you will lose. And with Stormrazor being so effective at basically snowballing, if you fall behind, playing support feels terrible because they get Stormrazor, you don't have it, you don't win duels or 2v2s. You just don't have that like comeback mechanic because there is such a big power difference between BF Sword and Stormrazor. So Stormrazor made it even more one-sided. You fall behind, playing support just feels even worse. And then probably the biggest problem for supports was when they nerfed Ares damage, electrocute, scorch, sudden impact, celerity, and cheap shot. And these were all really, really, really effective on a lot of supports. Like Scorch, so good on a support for harassing. Ares damage has been toned down. Cheap Shot was actually really underrated, and a lot of supports like Fiddlesticks would sometimes take Scorch plus Cheap Shot for just like as much poke and harass as you possibly could have. So you had a lot of burst runes nerfed for reasons that I don't think were directed towards supports. But now supports are just weaker because they would frequently take this. They wouldn't always take Electrocute, but Electrocute was so good that you could take it. I would take it in some matchups as Pyke instead of Aftershock because of how good the early burst was, and you'd have stuff like Sudden Impact or Cheap Shot, and then you take Scorch secondary. So they nerfed the leaning presence of supports and their sustain and their damage. Supports just have less impact right now. And they also buffed heal, which makes it even more frustrating because if you're not getting kills in lane, then playing support feels less effective if you're not snowballing. So what should you play? Now, we've talked a lot about like what makes it so awful to play supports right now. But so what supports should you play? And that typically is what this big picture is. You should be playing tanks right now. These are the most effective picks because they have the lowest risk. They get... tank supports aren't taking the Ares. You aren't taking the Scorch. You're taking like Aftershock or Guardian. So you aren't being punished as much for these nerfs. Plus, when their poke support doesn't have Scorch, Cheap Shot, Airy, Electrocute, like sudden impact type damage that's there, plus they have less sustain, it feels easier to play a tank support because you're not getting poked out of lane as frequently. You can take stuff like Biscuits to make it easier to lane as a tank support. Plus, you have stuff like Bone Plating and the stuff in the Resolve tree to stay even in lane when you're getting poked low. And it's just easier to play tanks. So when they're nerfing all these poking supports, like the Lulus who got nerfed by the airy damage and scorch damage and cheap shot damage, you really don't have the same laning phase. Tank supports just got indirectly buffed because a lot of the poke supports got nerfed. Do you really want the game to be centered around tank supports? It's less interactive, it's less fun, but typically, and you can look at the God tier list video that I have, the best supports are basically tanks: Pyke, Alistar, and Braum. Those are the most effective supports. If I want to win, playing a tank support isn't as consistent as playing carries because you don't have as much killing impact. And I think that really carries through to a lot of divisions in ELOs across the board. It's just maybe Pyke is really good, but if he's banned out, then what other carry supports can you really effectively play to dominate? Because you can't always do that with a tank. So to sum it all up, I really feel like the support role is a lot weaker right now because you're limited to playing mostly tanks. The poking supports are a lot weaker. And you compare it to other roles and positions, I truly think that it's harder to win on support right now compared to jungle, mid, top. And bot lane in general is just in a really weird state. But if you're watching this right now, you probably can watch my YouTube, or you can probably watch my Twitch stream from my YouTube video. There's going to be a link that'll pop up when my Twitch stream is live, and you come and ask me questions directly about support role or things in particular about the video or anything that you want to talk about in general about League of Legends. Thank you guys, and until next time, have a good one.